Here today on this panel on global business. I am Joanne Martin, and it's my pleasure to moderate the panel. I'm actually going to be part of it, and you all are too. Our goal and our hope is that this will be very, very interactive. We have things to say, and we'll keep talking if you don't. But we would much prefer it if you would raise your questions and let us know what's on your mind. How many of you, just as a quick starter so we know, how many of you work in a global role in a way that you're really reaching out? It's hard not to in technology today, so that's very good to see. All right, so we're going to do quick introductions. I'm going to have Marina start, and I'll come back and introduce myself, and then we'll get going.
Thank you, Joanne. My name is Marina Levinson. I have been in the IT industry for a little bit over 30 years, not to age myself. And the last 12 plus, I was global CIO of a couple of high-tech, high-growth companies. In '99, I was recruited to be the first CIO of Palm Computing, if you remember Palm. A long time ago, pioneer in mobile computing. And it was actually quite exciting to be part of a spin-off from 3Com and build everything from scratch and go through the IPO. So very exciting. However, as you know, Palm hit pretty hard times, and in 2005, I was recruited to join NetApp as their global CIO. So I spent about 6.5 years with NetApp, and I retired from corporate life last September. And about a day after I retired, I started my own business called CIO Advisory Group, to my husband's chagrin. And the focus of my business is to provide high-level technology advice to C-level executives, CEOs, CFOs, CIOs. I also do coaching of high-potential IT execs. And I also work with VCs and portfolio companies to help them understand how to sell into the enterprise market, how to sell to enterprise IT and to CIOs. So Joanne asked me and Heather, when we started talking about this panel, what actually qualified us for this particular topic, global business. And I felt there are two things that qualified me personally. First of all, I worked in global companies and had global responsibilities since 1987, so for a very long time. In fact, my first job when I joined 3Com in '87, and I spent the next 12 years there, was to implement systems for all international subsidiaries at 3Com. But secondly, I actually was born in Russia, and I immigrated to United States after graduating from college in 1980. And maybe because I'm an immigrant, I was always very sensitive to all issues of diversity, and probably was very sensitive when I had responsibility for a global group. So based on that, I probably can answer a lot of questions that you might have about global responsibilities and some of the challenges as well as fun of being in charge of global organizations.
Good morning, everyone. Here. I think we will do that. Good morning, everyone. Oh, there I am. First off, I just want to say thank you for attending, and I hope that this will be a wonderful session for you to learn. I've learned so much in just in the past week or so that we've gotten to know each other. So if you're ever asked to be on a panel, say yes, because it's an amazing experience in terms of getting to know the other panelists and learning from them, even in the short conversations that we've had so far. My name is Heather Healy, and I work at EMC. EMC is a provider of cloud and big data solutions. We have about 55,000 employees worldwide. And I'll talk about my current responsibilities, but I want to back up a moment. I, too, have been in the industry for quite some time. If I do the math correctly, it's about 25 years, but I did start when I was 18, so that's good. I've had a number of roles across a number of technology companies, and in product management and engineering and mergers and acquisitions, and that naturally lends itself to kind of the global marketplace because you're no longer engineering in one location, you're engineering in multiple locations, and for acquisitions they can take you anywhere in the world, and so that's really been my heritage, both in major corporations as well as in startups. I've been at EMC now for 13 years. And my current role is nearly entirely global. However, I am resident at corporate. So within EMC, we have 7 centers of excellence worldwide in places like Israel, Egypt, Russia, India, China, and the like. And my role is to make sure that all the employees in those centers of excellence have the right technology and tools available to them so that they can collaborate with all the other employees within the company. And so that's my current role. I also assess the risk in each of our centers of excellence and work with the business unit partners on risk mitigation strategies as we go forward, both from a business perspective as well as... Sure, I can speak louder. Could be just Carolyn? Nope. We'll ask the AV person to... there we go. Wow, I really feel loud now. So when we were putting together the talking points for this and what would qualify us to be on the panel, certainly leading global teams has been something that I've done throughout my career, and that is represents its own special challenges and opportunities for learning. But as I said, in the current role that I have today, people ask me where my office is, and I should be able to say Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which is where our corporate offices are, but I would probably pick any airport as being my office because that's generally where I am, and Carolyn can attest to that in terms of the calls that I'm making from the Terminal B or C or wherever I am. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And I'll just do a quick introduction. I'm Joanne Martin. I'm the Vice President of Technology at IBM. And that has a couple of components, one of which is responsibility for our technology agenda within the company, but the other is responsibility for our global technical community. So we have 250,000 technical people around the world, probably half or so in places that are far away from where I am. And so there's a lot of time spent making sure that they're integrated, finding out what it's going to take again, what are the tools that we need, what are the communication models that we need to be able to feel engaged, and to make sure that every IBMer feels that they are a global employee, that their job may be one place and their work location might be another and their home might be another, but they have everything they need to be fully interactive and fully participating wherever they are. My craziest global job was probably when I ran IBM.com. I had a business team in New York and North Carolina. My development team was in Canada. My test team was in Mexico, and my support team was in India. And it worked, and it worked out very well. But it makes you very focused on how to include people everywhere. We've all talked about the challenges of 7 a.m. calls, 6 a.m. calls to find the right time that works out, and other tools that help. But that's sort of the name of the game. It makes life interesting, I think, and it also, I've been really excited by how much I've been able to learn about different cultures. Traveling, I always try to take a little bit of extra time and meet people that are not people at work necessarily and just understand the culture, because it helps me then to interact with the people that I'm working with on the team to understand what they go home to and what their pluses and minuses are. So it's an exciting time. I think the capabilities that we have in technology today, I don't know which came first, whether we're more global today because the tools and the technologies bring us closer together, or whether the tools and technologies are advancing rapidly because we're so global and we need them. But either way, it seems to be in sync. So that's our starting point. So with that, I'm going to ask the first question of the panelists, and then I'm going to ask you, after we answer this one, to think about what yours are, and so be ready. Okay. So why do you think global is important? What do you think is important about that today, and why is it changing?
If I can start, I think we live in the world without borders. Actually, there are pluses and minuses of that. The crisis there is in Europe always tells you that there might be some negatives in being without borders. But having worked in global companies, it's very important to understand how business is conducted in different parts of the world, and make sure that you balance the corporate objectives, what the corporate wants to do, with some local I would say, cultural differences to make sure that the end result is the right outcome for the company. And at this point, there are, of course, there are some companies that are focused only on certain markets, whether it's Asia, whether it's Europe, whether it's United States. But I think the majority of the businesses that probably you guys represent all have some kind of global international component. I also want to say that from the career perspective, for those of you that are up-and-comers, I think it's very important to volunteer for international assignment. It's very important to have this global exposure. It's probably one of the few things that I always recommend to both men and women to experience that, because it really enriches your experience. It makes you so much better as a global leader if you yourself have the experience running piece of the business outside of the United States.
So I would agree with both of those points and expand upon one, and that is talent. Not necessarily in terms of developing talent and taking on a global role, but finding the right talent. It is very challenging to run a company these days and have your talent be based in one location. In order to find the right talent for the problems that you're trying to solve or the opportunities that you're trying to gain on, really you need to find that talent that has the insight, the answers, the innovative ideas or approaches to the area that you're focused on. And a lot of times that talent may not be resident in your local area. And so it's very important as companies today look to make sure that they have a very diverse workforce and have plenty of diverse ideas to choose from an innovation perspective. That means seeking talent from other regions typically, and in that way, you know, global companies today really their talent strategies are very tightly tied to, similar to what we've done in our company, centers of excellence or other regional outposts, and that's something that technology enables, because, you know, 10 years ago we didn't have instant messaging the way that we do today. We didn't have mobile workers capable of working anywhere, and so it's really finding the right talent, because we have the tools that we can put in place so that they can all be part of that one global corporation, or that working towards that one goal.
Cool. All right. Are there questions? Is there a question out there that we can take first? Thank you. There's a mic right up in the middle there. And introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Carrie Richland. I've done quite a bit of international projects and worked with a lot of the different major companies in the U.S. with their teams working internationally. And one thing I noticed in my different projects is a lot of companies call themselves a global company, but really they're a U.S. company doing business globally, because I see they don't take into account the culture and so on. I was wondering, what are some of the best practices, or what are the things you would say to look for to say this is truly a global company versus just a company doing business internationally, and what we should strive for to truly be a global leaders?
You want to try?
Sure, I'll take the first answer to that. I would say that is a very common challenge in my experience in talking with my peers and friends within the industry. I would also say that in my own experience, I find that I become an evangelist for the teams that I'm interacting with internationally. So by visiting the different locations, getting to know the people, getting to know the capabilities, getting to know the markets, the customers, and what makes those centers or those groups of people unique. I find that as I'm back in corporate working on problems, I'm bringing in that global perspective, and I'm bringing in making connection points between people with different ideas. Somebody may have an idea in corporate that it kind of builds up upon an idea that I might have heard about in Israel. Making those connection points is important. So I find that in my role, I'm kind of almost becoming that conduit. I'm championing those ideas and the groups of people, but it's also helping our corporate businesses and our corporate folks understand more about our global enterprise centers of excellence and the people and our capabilities and our customers in those areas. So it's kind of a two-way street where I get pulled into the conversations for the observations that I have to share, but I'm also making the connection points and making sure that folks know that they can reach out and leverage these other resources. So it's really, I think it's a very valid observation. I think it is probably more common than we might think, and I also think, though, that it gets better over time.
From a business perspective, I would say it's a journey. For IBM, it has certainly been a journey. We started as an international company, and that's the way you would have described it, as a U.S. company with international bases. Our initial bases of operation were mostly sales, and so the research and development was done in the U.S. and the sales was done elsewhere. We moved into being somewhat of a different kind of company where we set up many IBM structures everywhere, so every country or every region had its own headquarters, had its own environment, and everything ran from there. And over the last period, the next phase of our transformation has really been to become globally integrated. And that's meant a lot of different things that we've had to transform. So today, our HR functions, our finance, all of the core processes that you run, whether it's procurement, are run on a global basis. And that has made us truly a global company. And so now we rotate execs around. Sometimes they're in the U.S. and they move elsewhere. Sometimes they're elsewhere and they move to the U.S. We have people who are we're really looking at taking missions and making sure that core missions are grounded elsewhere in the world and supported in the U.S., as opposed to always being grounded in the U.S. and supported elsewhere. And so I think it will continue to be a journey. I wouldn't say that we're anywhere we're complete yet, but I think that's sort of the progression that you need to watch. And when you see the centers not in the U.S. being the ones that are deciding what technologies will be pursued, what business strategies will be pursued, and sharing them back as well as going the other way, then I think you start to move into actually being a global company.
So I just have one more comment, Marina, if you let me to. One thing to look for that I think is something that, it's a basic question to ask if you're looking at a particular opportunity in a company, or if you're working with a company and you really want to test the mettle in terms of is it a global or a global, truly global company, or is it a matter of outposts? How do they handle innovation? How do they share ideas? Do they use social media so that all employees have the same access to collaborating on ideas? Are they hosting things like innovation conferences? How are they keeping employees connected? I think those are good questions to ask that will help you to get a sense of culturally, is it real, or is it something that they're striving for, or just kind of how far along the journey they may be at that point.
One thing I want to add, my observation and my experience is when you have one of the top execs moved from the center of gravity, which is usually United States, to an international location, and the power shifts to that location, this is where you are becoming truly global. If all the power concentrated in the United States, it's truly what you said, it's a US company with some presence internationally. And one company that I know of that has done a really good job is Cisco. They moved a lot of their executives from the headquarters actually to India when they wanted to establish a very strong presence in India. My experience also taking key execs and on an expat basis moving them to other regions and moving that power gravity towards those regions, as well as developing those execs, making them much more well-rounded and much more kind of sensitive to diversity into different regions. I think that's also what I observed is probably best practice.
Anybody with another question or follow-ups? Yep. And Carolyn, did you want? Okay.
My name is Joy Chang. I'm from IBM. Actually, I do have kind of an echo to the panelists. We know that a lot of power are still in the central headquarters, no matter which headquarters, either in US or whichever country. But Joanne, for your kind of insight, how do we actually empower the technology or the innovation that form in the different regions that can be kind of the centerpiece back to the headquarters. I think right now there's still a lot of technology or innovation still around the headquarters or the mother country. So how do we really empower that kind of innovation? And I also see that a lot of regions still more like sales oriented or development, but kind of a development under the direction of the headquarters. So how do we really empower the local to have more of that kind of strength?
So since you asked that, I'll start it with, it isn't perfect, and it's going to take a while. We have processes that we want to make sure are being followed and addressed elsewhere so that we can have a totally global environment. And so we need to work to develop talent, IBM's talent, elsewhere, and make sure that we can trust and fully release the reins. So I think there's work underway. IBM has opened research centers all around the world. So we have research centers in China and India and Brazil, in Japan and Switzerland. So they're all over, and those really become the core for the Center of Innovation. And they own their own research agenda at each of those sites, and it's tied to what's important in that region. In Brazil, we have our research center has a lot to do with resource allocation and natural resources. In India, it would have a lot to do with service development. So they're tied, and the innovation starts there. And what we're doing then is planting development labs close to those research centers. So we can't do a student body left and say, okay, now everything's going to come from somewhere else, because we need to build the connections, and we need to be able to know what's coming and how it's going to connect back in so that we still have a global environment. But more and more, we're planting, and we'll be using, and as those centers grow, and as the talent in those centers grows, we'll do some shifting of people back and forth. We need to know that we have leaders there. We have a lot of talent, but it's core talent, and the leadership doesn't happen overnight. So we're working very hard to develop that leadership. One of our senior vice presidents, who was on assignment in China for a while, said he was really looking for a way to microwave distinguished engineers. He needed to have, hundreds of distinguished engineers, and that's a technical executive role that you don't make overnight. And so he was looking for what are the ways that we can really accelerate and move people faster to that senior leadership position, because you can't just declare somebody a leader. You're a leader when people follow you. And so we need to build that strength. So we'll do it first through research, then through the development labs. And it's a journey, but we have those things. Within IBM, we've planted those labs, I think, effectively everywhere.
First of all, I think it has to be the strategy of the company. If the strategy of the company to have strong regions that participate in innovation and drive some of the product development, then it will work. However, if the company wants just to have sales support type of capabilities, that's how the company wants to run their business. And you just need to recognize that, and if it's not in line with what you're trying to achieve, then there are plenty of other companies that work differently. Personally, as a global CIO, what I encourage my regional leaders to do is actually took over leadership of a corporate program. So we don't need to run all our key programs from the center. Obviously the majority would be, just because we have less people in the regions, but I wanted to make sure that the regions felt that they can not only participate, but also to drive. And that was my technique in involving regions in large corporate initiatives.
So just two comments, one related to innovation, and I think one of the... I think it's reading it up. It must be. Actually, it was Marina last time. One of the things that I think is important is really providing opportunities to showcase innovation and to showcase the ideas that are coming from non-corporate offices, because I think that really allows the talent to be showcased. but it also allows the rest of the company to understand some of the challenges that customers may be facing in that particular market. And then the other thing, you talked about development and sales, and sometimes it's a sales outpost or a sales office, and then maybe development. Who better to develop solutions for a particular market than somebody that is actually in that market, especially if it's a new market for you, rather than having folks in an area that have no experience in that particular market, trying to imagine what the use cases or the challenges might be. I think it's very healthy to have development and sales very closely linked, especially when you're talking about trying to tap into a new or emerging market or a high growth market as well.
Carol.
First of all, I love this topic. It's so timely. You're all so qualified. We're so grateful. So thank you for that. How many companies are utilizing, I'm sure you heard Genevieve Bell last night, using cultural anthropologists as companies grow more global and culture is so directly related to understanding the issues both of the global customer and the workforce? Is that something your companies even talk about or consider? No.
Not in my case.
I think it's a great idea. I would say we haven't, I'm not aware of our using anthropologists per se. We talk a lot about culture and understanding it, but probably not that focused.
I was just curious. But did you want to answer that before?
Not as far as I'm aware.
But I'm also, since, as you know, Heather, WITI has definite plans to expand more and more globally to serve not only our mission of helping women all over the world, but also to support our corporate partners. And we're a small company, and there are many people here who have small companies and don't have the resources of an EMC or an IBM to expand globally. Are there resources or organizations to help smaller entities grow globally because there are obvious challenges in doing that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. That might be a business opportunity,
It could
actually.
be. It could be.
But I wondered if you knew of anything like that. No. Okay.
It's a great idea, though.
Yes. Thank you.
I just want to make one point. It's not necessarily related to the point you're making, but we're here as women executives and women that want to be executives. And there is definite implication when you are accepting a global role. There are certain implications of an impact to your work-life balance, and I think you need to realize that. On one hand, I absolutely encourage people and women to volunteer for global positions, international assignments, but if you want to balance having a happy life and happy work life and the balance, you need to realize that there are some very serious implications. Joanne already mentioned that if you have both Asian and European responsibilities, which I had as a global leader, basically it's a 24/7 role. And you need to figure out how you balance that, because it's very easy to work yourself to death. And clearly, you know, I tortured my staff. We had, every week we had 7 o'clock meetings, because that's the only time that was reasonable for us, UK and Europe, as well as my Asian leader actually volunteered to stay late. That was his choice. It's important for you to figure out how do you balance early calls, late calls, and ensure that you're not working 18 hours a day. When we were talking before the panel, you know, I raised 2 kids, and actually that helped me personally to do a good job balancing multiple various things and that I needed to work on. So I would get up, I will have a conference call with Europe in the morning, I would go to work, I will leave work around 5:30 or 6. I go home, have dinner, and then I will have a phone call, a one-on-one with my Asian leader. It made it a long day, but there was a break in the middle there. So you just need to be aware that you can't work 24/7. At some point, you're going to collapse and nobody's going to win. But there are techniques that will allow you to be an effective global leader. You just need to understand what those techniques are. Heather, do you want to add anything? You are truly a global leader.
Sure. There is the aspect of always being on and being, I think it's very important when you take on a global role, especially to make sure that you're being responsive. Because if people don't hear back from you, if they've dropped you an email or sent you a text or something like that, and you're not on a plane and can't respond because of that, and if there's a delay in responding, that can send different messages in different cultures. So it's very important to acknowledge and at least respond as quickly as possible, even if you don't have the answer, to direct them to somebody that might, or tell them that you're working on it or something like that. The aspect of time zone challenges and being on the phone, I actually had a telepresence right across the street at 6 o'clock this morning that I had to be fully made up for because I was presenting, and it's part of doing business. But you also have to look after yourselves and your families, and you need to make sure that you're finding a way to make that balance work. So it's important to recognize that in global roles you'll need to be on most of the time. But it's also important to make sure that you understand and figure out how you're going to set your personal boundaries so that you can make sure that you have that happy life as well. So we have a question from the audience.
Yes, my name is Therese. And I'm in staffing at Microsoft Global Services. I get a lot of questions about career advice. I tend to be seen as a coach. And so my question to you is, one, what are the present challenges for you as CIOs, technology challenges, business challenges, that you think women are uniquely qualified to address? And if they need to prepare themselves either with education or information within their own company, how do they prepare themselves to really be a great resource for you guys globally?
That's a great question, and I'll start off and then we can pass the mic around. I would say women are very uniquely capable in the global workforce in the sense of collaboration is such an important, driving global collaboration is such an important aspect of where we are today in many of our roles. And I think that women in particular really drive that, tend to drive that collaborative nature amongst the projects and programs that they're involved with. When they're working with teams, I think it's very important to make sure everyone feels as though that they've been heard. Their opinion may not be the direction that we take, but making sure that people feel that they've been heard. Very important in multicultural teams and programs as well. So I think we do have a very distinct skill set that I think is our sweet spot. It's something that comes very natural to many of us, and I think that's something that in the global programs that I've been involved with, I think has been a real asset for me to bring that to the table. In terms of the second part of your question was related to how to get started and development opportunities. If you're not, if you someone may have a sense of I want to be in France or I want to be in Russia, and if you have a sense of exactly where you want to be for whatever reason, something you've always wanted to do, or you read a book and you suddenly wanted to go live in that part of the world. If that's the case, then certainly some language skills would be something that you might want to invest in. If it's something more general where you think you just might want to step into a global role, but you're not quite sure, you're not quite ready yet, your family may not be ready yet, you can volunteer into a global program where you can participate as a resource that's not necessarily on the ground in a foreign location, but still get a sense of what it's like to be on a global team. And then the third thing I would suggest is observe, watch other executives that are global executives. If executives or folks from remote offices are visiting your headquarters, get some time with them. Go out for coffee, and just learn more what life is like in those types of roles, and then potentially use somebody like that as a mentor for you in the future. So those would be my 3 recommendations.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, and actually I was interviewed by Forbes when I was at NetApp, and they asked me, what are my challenges as a female CIO? And my answer was that I really didn't consider myself a female CIO. I happen to be female, but you know, I encourage women to compete with the boys the way boys compete between each other. So I actually would encourage women to maybe to focus less, and again, it's controversial on being female, but focus on what you're trying to achieve within your career. Select mentors, either male or female, that you admire, that will help you get where you need to go. So might not be a popular answer here at this particular conference, but I actually prefer that we focus less on either our advantages or disadvantages and really focus on what we're trying to achieve in our careers.
I would agree with that, and I guess I would have one other comment. As we look at different cultures, I think women are good at collaboration, and that's one of the things that we've been recognized for, and that's a strength. In a lot of cultures, especially outside of the U.S., being abrasive, being direct, being assertive is not viewed as a plus, and so it's a special challenge that we have to help our colleagues around the world with once we've helped ourselves with it. And IBM has a very direct and assertive culture, especially there's some parts of IBM that are especially that way. And so when I work with especially younger women, I try to address that, and they say, but I don't want to be that person. Well, they don't have to be that person, but they have to understand how to perform in that environment. And there may be a point where they have to recognize that there's an IBM culture that is global, and then there is the regional culture, and they've got to separate the one that they go home to from the one that's at work. And it's a challenge, and there are ways to learn it, and there are ways to grow. And it doesn't mean you have to become one of the guys, because I would never, ever recommend that. But you do have to understand what it means and what the culture is meaning. And frequently, I think, as women, we take offense at the way that the language goes, at the way that the directness goes, and if we can at least educate ourselves to not do that and to recognize what it is and what it isn't, that helps. And as we look globally, I think that that kind of recognition is amped up by a factor of 10 at least, and so understanding that and reaching across those divides becomes very, very important.
I think this is actually a very important point, and I think what you're saying is women are more adaptable, and I can't agree more with this, because you really need to understand the culture of your company and be in line with how to behave in your company, and what is the difference between different regions within your company. And my observation is actually women are more adaptable than guys in that respect.
There's more empathy there, and that helps. And you have one over here. And then down here, next. You're next.
Would you mind coming to the mic?
It makes us feel better.
Okay. Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Hi, I'm Rachel Book with AT&T, and I lead our global talent attraction strategies, and a big portion of that includes attracting diverse talent to all parts of AT&T. So women, people of color, individuals with disabilities, military veterans. And as we're starting to do more hiring outside the U.S., in APAC, in CALA, in EMEA, and a lot of our hiring, is true engineering, it's not, support personnel, we're finding that there aren't as many organizations such as WITI or resources or even a desire to proactively go out and seek a diverse candidate pool for some of our hiring efforts. So how have you addressed that, given the focus within the U.S. and how you've adapted that overseas?
Within IBM, we have the same focus everywhere. And so we look for diversity, we relish it, we cherish it, and we grow it. So I would say that our practices are very strongly focused on making sure that we pull up the diverse environment. So we don't count a lot beyond ourselves in that, and we pull it ourselves.
Actually, all the companies that I worked for, diversity was secondary. I hate to say that. And the focus was, let's get the best possible candidate for the job.
So I would also just suggest that you get some time with Carolyn, because I think Carolyn is very serious about the international presence for WITI, and I think it might be a great opportunity for you to collaborate with her on that.
There's one here, I promised. And then not hearing you very well.
Hi, I'm Donna Kawasaki, and I just moved from Singapore here. I lived there for 5 years, and previous to that, I lived in Tokyo for 2. So it's called Board Agender, and it's an organization.
Spell that.
Board Agender. So board, B-O-A-R-D, and then agender, so A-G-E-N-D-E-R, Board Agender, yeah. And if you do a search on Juanita Woodward, she's one of the co-presidents. So they have a Western president, and then they have an Asian president, and she has 18 years of experience in Asia Pacific. And they've chosen 100 leaders of the top companies in Asia Pacific, and they're specifically tasked with getting women on Fortune 1000 boards.
Nice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
My name's Rita. Sorry, I guess I gotta get close. My name's Rita Amami. I work for FICO, and I have operated as a global leader, and I actually I realize that all companies want to be global, but in all practicality, what we found was you can't, I mean, to your point, I had a China leader, a leader in India, EMEA, and the US. Lots of 4:30, 5 a.m. calls so that you could talk for an hour and then regroup at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night so you could talk for another hour. And the reality is, I think that collaboration just can't happen in that environment. You can't have 2 one-hour conversations. Collaboration needs to be, I think, longer. And so what happened over time was the remote offices became more routine and less in the innovative, collaborative areas. They got more routine jobs. And eventually those people felt like, because we'd hire the best talent, and they'd say, why am I here to do this routine work? I want to do more innovative and collaborative things. But practicality of time zones, until we solve that, which maybe they will with space travel, I don't know how you can be very collaborative. And one other comment on the gender and hiring women in other markets. Again, being culturally sensitive, the reality is when I went to China, I was not respected by the leaders in China. I would never hire a woman leader in China. I would hire a man, because that's being respectful of their culture and where they are today. And I'm going to get a lot further as a business with a man as a leader than a woman. That's just the reality of where they are today. So, I mean, I hate to be, but I'm just trying to be very practical here and trying to make it happen practically. And I just want to hear your comments on that.
I think you just identified some of the important principles of being global, and that understanding the cultural differences and actually aligning that to the objectives of the company versus blindly saying, we have this quota and this is what we're going to do. So I'm always been very pragmatic, and again, being an immigrant, always tried to promote the diversity everywhere that I worked, but I also was pragmatic, and like you said, if in China it requires a man to do the job, we'll get a man,
I wanted to address your first point on collaboration, and I think that there are different models of collaboration, and whether people that I'm working with are here in India, or here in China, or China and India, or in New York and Boston, if I'm collaborating by phone, there's already a little bit of a challenge, right? Face-to-face is the ultimate, and I think all of us would acknowledge that. There are things that if you could just walk down the hall and have a conversation at any time, it's easier, it's friendlier. But most of our world isn't like that.
Yes, agreed.
Most of us are distributed, whether we're distributed in across the U.S. or across the world. Yes. We aren't going to change when the sun comes up and when the sun lands. Right. But I do think that with tooling and with the right social platforms, with the right asynchronous capabilities, then the phone calls become catch-ups. They don't become the primary method of collaboration. They become the extra. And that we need to grow that. I think that the next generation coming up, because they are so into the technology and so they're just growing up live on, I watch my granddaughter and she thinks a magazine is a broken iPad, right? Because she can't flip it. And she's 3, so they get it. And I think that they're going to be so comfortable with that method of communication that they won't be inhibited. And so that's coming, and the rest of us need to work to get used to that. So I think collaboration is going to find its own methods, and those one-hour conference calls won't be the collaboration.
Right.
But I think you're right about the other and being pragmatic.
So I would just build upon that. I agree with exactly what you were saying. I would build upon that and say video has really changed my life in terms of being able to interact with the team. First meetings with a team or individuals, setting it up with video really changes the. It sets the tone, I think, for the level of collaboration and engagement that you'll have. Luckily, I can do it now from my iPad or from my laptop in a hotel room, which is fine. I do think that the status meetings or the phone calls become catch-ups at that point, unless there's problems. And then when there's problems, it's all hands on deck, and everyone is doing whatever it takes. So it is kind of finding its own way. I think I would agree with that as well. I would also underscore that the generation of employees that are graduating college today have very different expectations around mobility. For them, it shouldn't matter if I'm down the street or across the world, and they're expecting that global engagement. And so we need to make sure to put the technologies and tools in place and in processes to make that happen.
I'm Uma Srinivasan from hardware development at IBM. My question sort of plays into what she was saying earlier. When you're working as a global team, I mean, how do you work around the inherent inefficiency of that? I mean, if you're you're talking about engineers from 5 or 3 different countries trying to get together to solve a problem, and it doesn't quite work well if you're in different time zones to move it forward in an efficient way. I mean, you're talking about 12-hour time differences, and you say, okay, I'm going to send the email, and okay, wait until tonight, and it also makes you have to be on 24/7. In addition to that, you can't force other teams with different work cultures to be on 24/7. So it's sort of inherently inefficient. I mean, how do you work around that?
I think this is one of the key innovations that we need today. We talk about innovations in product development, and how we develop is one that we need to think about. I think we can actually use the time differences to our advantage. My view is that what engineers do is they take things apart and put them back together. And if we can figure out how to take apart the development process appropriately, we can distribute it in a way that makes sense. And so that one piece of work gets sent to the next group to work on when I'm going to sleep. They can now work on it. It's not how we're used to working. We're used to working with everybody right there, and we can hand out tasks and we can share them. But I think we need to be very creative about how we really divide tasks up and share them in a way that they move around the world and take advantage of the sun, not use it as a problem. I think I've seen it done. I have done it. I have one patent that actually is about how to take apart a service process and have it done around the world in a way that's very effective, and you pass things around. And I think we can do that with development too. I think there's real innovation required there.
I think we've got some more questions.
Hi, I'm Meg Worrell. I'm also from IBM. Sorry about that. There's like 6 million of us here. And I work worldwide as a technical person. And as a woman, what I bring to technical services is that in addition to understanding how to code, I'm able to communicate that. And that's something a lot of us in this room are able to do. But what I wanted to share with you is how I work with my global teams in a way that's successful. So one thing that I started with that's kind of artificial at first, but becomes much more organic as you go along is, many of you are familiar with the agile idea of doing that check-in. I do that on the phone. I make sure that I find out what everybody is up to and that we interact. Sometimes there's things called jams in IBM, and what it meant to me before I joined IBM was, like, as a musician, you all contribute. Sometimes that's not the case. When I hold a jam, the phone line is always open. You are always able to interrupt. And I actually do interrupt. So my last training I did for CEE last week, Central Europe, I start off with finding out, hey, what are you guys worried about? Here's the things I'm going to cover on this. Is this still what you're interested in? So I start off my conversation or my presentation with it being interactive. And in this way, they're already comfortable with stopping and being part of the process. And I think when you're doing conferencing globally, whether you're on the phone or on your video, you need to reach out to the people and make them part of the process from the beginning if you want them to be in it at the end.
Another question? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kathy Gettelfinger from ThoughtWorks. I just wanted to add to Dr. Martin what you said about restructuring how we develop. In my case, it's software. But something that I think is a challenge for leaders and at all levels is the notion of collaborative decision making. Because the thing that gets caught up is if I have to wait for somebody in another time zone to make a decision before I can move forward. And that's a piece that you have to look at in order to be successful with distributed development of anything. So I think that's a hard thing for people to let go of.
Good point. We're coming down on the hour. Are there any other questions out there? Yes? Or comments, whatever you want.
Hi, I'm Sylvia McCleary. I kind of did something the opposite. I actually, in '98, decided I wanted to live in Asia. And I literally got a visa and moved to Australia because I wanted Asian experience. And the American companies wouldn't let me work in Asia at that time. So when I moved down there, I actually traveled quite a bit. I've noticed since I've moved back, doing global roles, that most companies have kind of stopped their travel budgets so that when you're in a role and you need to go to, say, Asia, which they really do require to meet you face-to-face, they want that face-to-face time, that they've cut the budget so they don't want you to go. And I'm wondering how you guys deal with that, because if you're going to China or to Hong Kong or to Thailand, they really want to meet you in person. And if you don't have that face-to-face relationship, you really can't get to the next step.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that in certain instances it's absolutely required. And I was reading an article, an interview with Hillary Clinton. Now, I would never claim to have anywhere near the number of airline miles that woman has. I think it was like 770,000 in 12 months or something like that. But one of her messages was, you have to show up. And granted, she's not in high tech, but still in high tech, you have to show up. It's a lot of these situations are very critical to the relationship that you're there in person, and so it's something that you have to be very clear on and prioritize. Because you can't be everywhere all the time, but you need to make sure that you're prioritizing those that travel investment that is required from you personally and from the company that you're working for. It is tough. Travel budgets are, we're all under travel pressure for sure, but we have technologies that are in place that help us to alleviate some of that burden, but there's no replacement for showing up. And so that's something that's just very important. I think when you're looking at a role, you need to be asking your questions about yourself, but also the company in terms of, is this role supported in the way that it needs to be in order so that you can be effective as well.
Just a quick comment. I had a senior leader working for me who was in Asia, who was actually an expat, and after 4 years, then we replaced him with a local. But he was a very senior person that sat at the table with the executive team in APAC. But also because my job was very externally focused at NetApp, I actually made a point to meet with international customers when they came over here, not only when I visit. When I visit, it's a given. But when we had international customers come to our EBC, I made it a point to regularly meet with those customers and host them and welcome them to NetApp. So it's kind of a two-way street.
I think these are common issues. Within IBM, if it's client travel, we travel because we do know that you have to be there. Other travel, we restrict, we watch, we pinch pennies, but for clients, you have to be there, and so we don't stop that one.
I think it's just getting some of the smaller companies really to understand that that's important. And as somebody, I've worked all over the world, and I've done that because I've wanted to.
Right.
And to get those companies to understand that there are major cultural barriers, that if you don't turn up, they're not going to do business with you, and they won't respect you.
I think that's true. I mean, they can have business partners, they can find other ways to make the connection, but there has to be a connection. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and this will be the last one, I think, for this session.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Smriti Sharma. I'm from EMC Greenplum. I wanted to make a quick comment on, I think it was Kelly who talked about collaboration and, you know, sort of the decision making continuing to move forward. I'd like to call that as power sharing, only because I think culturally speaking, there are groups that I've worked with where if you want to move from point A to point B and you're out of pocket for those 8 hours because of night, you know, they do not want to give away that power that they sort of have developed. You know, you talk about product development or software development and so on and so forth. So I think that's sort of best facilitated, to your point, Joanne, about using a tool or having a process. So I just wanted to bring that point up. A question that I do have for all three of you is that in your current role or anywhere in the past, have you been asked to take an assignment globally, situated, you know, physically there? Because some of the male counterparts that I work with, they claim that in order to sort of move ahead in the corporate ladder, they have taken up assignments outside of the country to get to a certain point and then sort of skip around. So have you been asked to do that? And if so, how would you, assuming you don't want to do that, how do you work around that? And how do you make sure you sort of still are able to achieve what you would like to?
I'll tell you, this is one thing, the only regret I have in my career, because I was offered an international assignment in Europe to run IT for EMEA for 3Com, and I had 2 young children, and a husband had a business here, and I turned it down, and that probably was the only regret, sincerely, that I have, that I made a decision that I really wanted to do something professionally that I wasn't able to do because of the balance between family and life. It didn't really screw up my career that much, but it certainly didn't give me something that I wanted to do personally for my own professional development. So I encourage people to do this, but then understand as women, you have certain limitations, especially if you have young children that are in school that you don't want to take out of school here locally.
I would add to that, it comes at the other end too. So I haven't taken an international assignment. I've traveled a lot. I've been where I needed to be when I needed to be there. I have one of the considerations for my next position is, do I want to move internationally? And at this point, I have a 92-year-old father and an 87-year-old mother, and I'm not moving to Singapore. And IBM's okay with that because that's part of who we all are, and they understand that. So you've got all have lots of priorities and their personal decisions. Advancement, is it a good thing for career? Absolutely, it is a good thing for career today because you can fully understand what's going on elsewhere and bring those ideas back, and it does integration. Is it critical? Not yet. It may be in the future.
I would agree with both points. I think that although I've been open to it in many different times in my career, it's not something that I've actually landed in terms of gone after it. But I've gotten the global experience in other ways through running cross-functional strategic initiatives across the company, the current role that I'm in right now. So I don't feel as though I have a gap. I think I'd like it from a personal experience, certainly, and from a professional experience. I think it gives you a different sense of being totally immersed in a culture. But I haven't had that experience at this point. I do think that if it's something that you want, you need to lay the groundwork for it. You need to make sure that your desires are known by the right people, and that you are listening to what feedback you might be getting in terms of things that you need to, skills that you need to attain, or gaps that people have in terms of perceptions of you, or something like that. If it's something that you want, you definitely need to socialize that, and as I said, just be actively listening to what is it that you might need to fit into that role going forward, and then make sure you have a path back is very important as well, and I think that's something that you need to look at it full circle as well, or be comfortable if you don't, so just that approach as well.
I want to thank all of you. It's been a great conversation. I think we'll be around here for a couple of minutes if you have any specific questions, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.